We're reading from Matthew 7, 1 through 6. Judge not that you be not judged, for with the judgment you pronounce you will be judged, and with the measure you use it will be measured to you. Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when there is a log in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take the log out of your own eye, then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. Do not give dogs what is holy, and do not throw your pearls before pigs, lest they trample them underfoot and turn and attack you. May God bless the reading of his word. You may be seated, and Kids Point is dismissed.
Hey, Marvin, I have control over it, right? Okay, I got it. Cool, thanks. Yeah, pearls, swine. How did that passage get in there? Yeah, honestly, before studying it, I had no idea that that passage went with the rest of the passage. It was just one of those, like, someone once explained it to me, like, if you guys have ever seen a shopping spree in like a supermarket, people are just like grabbing stuff off the shelves, and there's like 5 seconds left, and they're like in the last aisle, they're like, let me grab that for the cart. And that's how that passage got into Matthew. So basically they're like, oh, we're saying all these things, and like, oh, this is on the shelf. Who knows if I need this? Let me throw that in the cart. And so that's how we get pearls before swine. But it's probably a little bit more than that. We'll find out today. Well, a couple things just that are surrounding us, the time and space and people that are surrounding us this weekend. This happens to be, does anyone know what this is, by the way, if you live around here? Yeah? Okay. This is the largest construction of the Buddha in the country. This is Vihara Meditation Center in, I mean, it's really in Franklin Park, but it's one of those things where everyone wants to claim it's in Princeton, and so that's what the address says, it's in Princeton. But if you're heading down 27 towards Kingston and Princeton, you know, where the Dutch market is, this is off to the right.
It's in Franklin Township with the zip code of Princeton.
Yeah, what does that even mean? You know, right? And so this happens to be a weekend. Well, at this time of year, a lot of different Buddhist communities across the world and even this country celebrate the Buddha's birthday. It's not a huge population in New Jersey or even in the United States, but it is one kind of locally in our area. So, you know me, I like for us to be aware of the people and the places that are around us. And so if you see some celebration happening down that part of 27, that's what it is. More broadly, obviously, we know of this weekend as Memorial Day. And you know, I was thankful for a conversation I had with Marty yesterday in like, what is it? What is the real focus of Memorial Day? What is it from the perspective of those who have served? And Marty was really helpful for me. He just kind of shifted my focus, which is, well, it's actually not just, or maybe not even primarily that as the perspective, but it's more the families of those that have had someone serve to the point of losing their life. And so I know there's at least one person who has had a member of their family, someone in their line that has lost their life through military service, and so we want to recognize that. So yeah, the barbecues, the cookouts, the extended weekends, but it actually harkens back to a display of sacrifice on behalf of this nation. This is kind of a debated topic in churches on whether or not things like Memorial Day should be recognized, and I'm still one of those which is, you know, I think it should still be recognized for the sacrifice that was deposited there. Not only that, but it's also an opportunity for us to learn. And in many ways, Memorial Day, and a lot of people are like, well, it started then, and it started then, and it started then. It probably dates back to not something in 1866, but something that began in 1865, actually in Charleston, South Carolina, known as Decoration Day. And Decoration Day was when both freed slaves and white missionaries in the area wanted to commemorate Union soldiers that lost their lives to a Confederate army. And so what they did is they took this race course that had all of these scattered gravestones, they reorganized it, they put a fence around it, and then they dedicated a full day to reflection, to praise, to sermons, and so thus began what became eventually Memorial Day. And so a day of sermons and songs and prayers and picnics, in many ways, that's the root of what we now kind of experience as this time in our calendar every year. So again, good to keep the broader context, the broader narratives around the times, places, and peoples that we're surrounded by. One of the other reason I put both this and this as kind of our launch this morning is because both of these things in some ways also spur on judgments from various people, right? Even some of you guys might be thinking, well, we're in a church, why are we talking about the Buddha? Or some of you might be thinking, well, we're in church, why are you talking about like honoring, in some ways, and honoring the military? Or is this part of, kind of the American patriotic, nationalistic addiction in the church? Judgments. Many of us can be spurred on to judgments by things that are kind of predictable and less than predictable. And this is not just something that happens in the broader culture, although it does happen there. It also kind of happens in the church. This is one kind of analysis done by the Pew Research Institution that does a number of studies. This is kind of just looking at maybe a cross-section of the Christian community in the U.S. And even as we look at that data, there are certain communities that we might say, oh, that's me, I'm part of that one, but I'm not part of that one. Or I agree with maybe what that part of the Christian slice is, but I don't agree with that one. And you might even get to a place of thinking, man, I don't even know if I would call that one based on their particular theological or political affiliation. I don't even know I would call them Christian. Right? So the judgment is not only around this, but it is kind of within us as well. Even within this church. Within whether it's been part of our history or even to this day, we are a people of, we're a diverse people, and I don't just mean demographically, but even in our beliefs and in our worldviews and our values. And this is something that is extended to the broader culture, right? Like judgment it's a funny thing. Right? As much as we talked last week about anxiety and that being like a hot button issue, so is judgment in one sense, right? You even go to like gyms in the area, right? Planet Fitness, it is the home of the judgment-free zone, right? And there's all this language of whether, you work at maybe a nonprofit or even a for-profit organization, they have these designated safe spaces. These judgment-free zones. Some of them call them safe spaces, some of them call them brave spaces, but they serve the same function, that this is a space where you can kind of say or be whatever you need to say and be your authentic self. Now, there is a little bit of hypocrisy as it relates to judgment in our culture, because at once, if you think kind of broadly, people are like, hey man, don't be judgy. And I hate judginess, and that person's so judgy, and that person's so judgy, and especially in our social media-driven generation, people are like, being judgmental is one of the worst things you could be, and yet, if you look in our social media space, it's like, it is the home of so much judgmentalism. It lives and breathes and festers and flourishes there even, which is why I like what old Uncle Mike here has to say, and I say this to my students. Social media made y'all way too comfortable with disrespecting people and not getting punched in the face for it. All right? Maybe a problematic figure to have up on a Sunday morning at church. But the statement that he's saying there is probably true. And so we do have this kind of split personality around the issue of judgment. And I think today what Jesus is going to call us to is to kind of avoid, in some ways, this duplicitous, this hypocritical posture we have towards judgment, where we are both like fierce judgers and judgmental on the one hand, and yet fragile towards being judged on the other hand. And so just as last week, where Jesus wanted to kind of increase and progress and give us pathways to greater peace, by us aligning to the Father's care and commitment towards his kingdom, this week, what Jesus wants to call us to is freedom from both this hypocritical and harmful expression of judgment by intentionally evaluating ourselves even more. I'm going to say that again. What Jesus is calling us to is a greater sense of freedom from either the hypocritical and harmful forms of judgment by taking on a more intentional posture towards evaluating self. So the question is, to judge or judge not? Let's find out. Let's go to the Word. Let's go to the Lord, and then let's jump into his word. Father, what does it mean for us to be properly judgmental? Is that even a category? How do we judge? How do we not judge? Should we judge? And if so, to what extent? And with what in mind? And towards whom? And from whom? And these are all the questions, Lord. And so I pray, Lord, just as last week, there wasn't a once and for all answer in how to engage our anxiety. There's not a once and for all answer in how to engage judgment. But rather, we pray that you would begin a conversation and, more than that, Lord, a culture in which we rightly handle what it means to judge and not judge in a way that brings you glory, in a way that grows us as a people, in a way that ultimately serves the people and places to which you've sent us. We ask for your grace. We ask for more of your Spirit towards those ends in Jesus' name. Amen, amen, and amen. We are in Matthew chapter 7, starting in verse 1. We're going to start with some of the more familiar areas and then get to something that's probably not as familiar and well known. With Jesus in verse 1, he launches in. It's kind of a weird face to look at for most of the service. So, let's see, where are we going to go? Is the Mountaintop thing there? All right, I guess we're just going to have to stare with Mike's tattooed face for a while. But let's tune into more Jesus' words than Mike's face, all right? So verse 1, judge not that you be not judged. Verse 2, for with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Now, judged, measured, questions might immediately jump at us. What is he talking about? What is he talking about? Who is he talking to when he's saying, you not be judged, or it will be measured to you? Who's doing the judging? Who's doing the measuring? What is it about? And I think the tendency for us is when we hear judgment to think something that is condemning. We hear judged and we kind of put it in our lexicon and it comes out condemned. And that is part of like the semantic range of this word. That is part of like, that's a possible meaning for what this is. Condemned in kind of a legal law court kind of setting. So that's one thing. Traditionally how it's kind of been heard. There's also this sense in a more contemporary setting that judge means to shame somebody, right? And I think that's more kind of automatic for us in like a post-Brené Brown kind of a world. Brené Brown, kind of psychologist, social psychologist, has done a lot of TED Talks on like the power of vulnerability, the power of shame, and she uses judgment and shame almost interchangeably, right? And so you got condemnation on the one hand in like a legal setting, like you are pronounced guilty, and then shame, kind of emotional shame that you feel with respect to a person or a community or even within yourself on the other hand. So those are two kind of common understandings we have of it. I think what Jesus is actually intending is the idea of evaluation, evaluating, assessing. And in this sense, when he starts off with, evaluate not that you be not evaluated, I think what he's talking about here is unfair evaluations and false narratives that you can kind of construct for people. All right, and so what Jesus is doing at the outset is he's surfacing some maybe confusion and misconceptions. Namely, how is it that we evaluate people unfairly? What are the misconceptions that arise? Well, keep reading in verse 3, where Jesus starts to ask questions. Now, when Jesus is asking questions, sometimes they're rhetorical questions. They're almost always very troubling questions for the people he's asking. And so there's like an uh-oh. Jesus is starting to ask questions, right? In verse 3, he's a why do you see? And then in verse 4, there's a how can you say? But they both have the same thing in mind, right? Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye? Or how can you say something about the speck in your brother's eye, the person to your right or your left, but you don't see the log that is jutting out of your own eye, right? How do you notice, how do you zoom in so much on this speck there, but you don't see the huge log here? And so that's one sort of misconception or kind of fragmented evaluation that people fall into. And this is not foreign to us as well, right? You can think about the ways in which we have disproportionate judgment. And it usually has like kind of jargon attached to it. You always do this. You never do this. Or you only do this. Right? You can even maybe imagine how you have said that to your spouse or your partner or your parent or your child this weekend. You're always this, you're never this, you're only this, you only do this, you're too much of this, you're not enough of this. And this kind of like absolutist thinking that is really in some ways a hyper-exaggeration. And it's one of those things that we do, especially with people that are like closest to us, or because those are the people that hurt us, or at least have the proximity to hurt us. Right? They have the most data on us. They're the ones that can kind of read our mail. And so when they say something, it means more than when someone else says something. Other ways this could be is when disproportionate judgment is when something that is a preference for you, you treat like it should be a priority for everybody, right? And I've done all of these things, right? This week, maybe even this morning. Something that is a personal preference for me, I treat like it should be a general priority for all, right? And you could do that when you like walk in here. Like it could be my sermon style. It could be Dave and Temmie's worship style here. Like you get so like white-knuckled ferocious about this thing. Meanwhile, like there are a gazillion other priorities that you leave untouched. But that's the thing. That's the closed-handed issue that we got to solve, that we got to address. And so, yeah, it could be the always, never, only. It could be the too much, the not enough. It could be the exalting your preferences over true priorities. It could also be this sense in which you think, when the Lord is speaking to me, like you're in the room right now, oh man, I wish this person were hearing this. This is for that person. Right? Like, I really need, my significant other to hear this, because this would fix them. Or I need my parent to hear this, or my coworker, or my boss, or my father, or my kid, whatever it is. So all of these ways in which we kind of really distort the distribution of focus on judgment. It's way bigger out there than it is here. I usually say this in congregation, like my sin looks way better on me than it does on you. It looks way worse on you than it does on me. And so at the outset, Jesus is really kind of addressing this imbalance we have between the speck that's there. I'm sorry I keep pointing at you, Evelyn. You're like, the speck that is there versus the log, the 2x4 that's here. Now, when you hear that, you might think, okay, all right, you're right. I do that disproportionate judgment. And who am I to do that? Right? I'm messed up. If anyone knew what was inside me, they'd know how messed up I am. So I'm gonna stop evaluating, and I'm gonna just mind my own business, right? That would seem like a logical way to do this. Like, okay, I'm going to stop what I am doing here. And that might be in some ways in keeping what Jesus is saying, because after all, in verse 1, he did say, like, hey, don't unfairly evaluate, because you might be unfairly evaluated. It's kind of the closest thing to what goes around comes around, as you're going to hear in the Sermon on the Mount. Now, what's wrong with this, though? What's wrong with saying, okay, I'm doing this problematic practice, I have this problematic perspective and mindset, what I should do is stop What is wrong with doing that? Well, what's wrong with doing that is that Jesus' call here in this passage, and most often not, is not a don't. It may start with a don't, but it is moving towards a do. It's moving towards a do with actually a pretty optimistic vision of judgment in mind. And so what does this sound like? Well, we got to keep reading. So let's keep reading in verse 5. Now, I just said it sounds like it's an optimistic vision of what it means to judge or evaluate. And then you read verse 5, and he starts off with, "You hypocrites! First, maybe take the 2x4 that's jutting out of your own eye out, and then you will see clearly to take this little piece of sawdust out of your brother's eye." Now, this is an interesting thing, because Jesus is obviously serious about this. This is the only place in the Sermon on the Mount that we've heard him say hypocrites to the people who are in front of him. He's usually saying, hey, don't be like the hypocrites who pray like this, or who fast like this, or who give like this. He's saying it to people who are doing some sort of performative practice that only have someone else in mind instead of the Lord. This is the only time that we've heard him yet use the word hypocrites to speak to people who are in the room. And so we know he's serious about this. And what he's serious about is that we're all supposed to see more clearly, right? Because he says, hey, first, take this out, and then you will see clearly to take that out. So he's not saying, hey, don't care about the speck. He's saying the log has to come out and the speck needs to come out. But he's saying one can't happen without the other. Now, how do we do this? How do we carefully, clearly, correctly, compassionately take the speck out of someone else's eye? Because Jesus is telling us we got to get to that place. How do we get to that place? And I think the way we get to that place is doing what we already do. What does that mean? I don't think, well, listen, sometimes we absolutely do evaluate other people unfairly. That does happen. We lack context, we get triggered in a moment, and we see things a certain way and only a certain way. We get very, very narrow-minded and judgmental in the worst sense of the word. But then there are other times where I do not think that we're wrong about the other person. There are other times where what we think and the evaluation we have made about that other person is actually fair. And it may not just be fair, it may be a healthy evaluation for you to make in order to keep you and the people around you safe and to stay healthy. Here's the thing, and here's why I think that you might be right sometimes when you make maybe even unkind evaluations of other people. Because you're actually pretty deliberate about your process. Because we don't really jump to that conclusion as often as we think. Sometimes we take the time to actually do an experiment. Like we'll actually gather data about people, about a person even. And we've seen that data accumulated not just in a moment, but moment after moment after moment over moment. And there's a time, if you're doing a study, they would call this, we have longitudinal data. We have data over multiple seasons and time periods and conditions, and this person is telling you the exact same thing. And so you're not only gathering data, you're also organizing it into trends. And you're seeing patterns. And you're not just seeing patterns, and after you gather the data, you also do kind of research. Like you might even actually talk to other people and see the same kind of data and patterns emerge about this person. And they might have the same kind of experience. And so now you're getting kind of an alignment. And at the end, you kind of make recommendations on how to deal with this person. And this is what I need to have kind of boundaries with this person or distance with this person. I can be in a healthy relationship this far, but I really can't go this far with that person. Right? All of this, sometimes we evaluate unfairly. Sometimes we evaluate really, really carefully. But here's the thing. I don't think we're necessarily wrong with how we evaluate that person because of this deliberate process we went through. I think the problem is we don't use that same process for ourselves. Because it's scary. I don't think we take the time to look at where it is that we might provide the same data and we might exhibit the same trend-like behavior that could be pointed out not only by this person, but this, and this person. And we definitely don't get to that point where we have diagnosed ourselves or allowed other people to diagnose us to the point where we actually will listen to specific recommendations for how to move forward, how to progress, how to heal. And so how do we do what Jesus is calling us to do here? Take the log out of our own eye so that we could take the speck out of somewhere else. How do we take the speck out of somewhere else? Well, do to yourself or allow others to do to you what you do with others sometimes. There's a conversation I had with my oldest daughter. I had with Hannah last week, and we were talking through a very, very kind of delicate area of her life. And it's both delicate and very relevant to the season of life she's in. And I don't know about you all, but I start from a place of saying, I'm going to be the topic of conversation one day when my kids are talking to their therapist. Okay? And I don't say that in a way that like heaps shame on me. That's just reality. I assume that. I presuppose that. I also think I'll be the topic of conversation when they say great things about me to other people, their friends and stuff like that, and I've already seen that. So I think in that sense, I think I have a balanced understanding that I will be the topic of several conversations they have about me, right? When you're an only child, Leo, you kind of think people are always talking about you. So I think my daughter will be talking about me in both directions. And in one of those directions is really, really relevant to her right now. And it's a place where I need to change. And so we talked through it, and I said to her, hey, we were talking about resentment. Do you have like kind of harbored up resentment towards anyone in your life? And she was like, yeah, and she was telling me like there's this person on her team, and there's this person that used to be on her team, this goofball that graduated. And I said, anyone else? Anyone else? She was like, yeah, and I was like, I'm just going to ask the direct question. Do you have this resentment towards me anywhere? And she was like, yeah, probably, right? And when you're a parent and when someone says, when your kid says probably yes, just remove the word probably. It's a yes. And I was like, okay, tell me. So first of all, I believe you. I don't even know, you need to hear what it is yet. I believe you. Now, given the fact that I believe you, can we talk through where that is, how that happened, and how I can be more helpful? And so we did that, right? We talked through that. And it was like an extended kind of mutual interview back and forth. And in that, I could see like her shoulders relax. I can see the tone of her voice change. And she wasn't even angry. In fact, she started off kind of nervous. And this does not mean I'm an exemplary parent. It just means that there is power in opening ourselves up to the same level of scrutiny that we use towards others. And I remember with Hannah, I remember us being, oh my gosh, she was probably 8 years old. And we were in our apartment at Princeton, and I'm weird, all right? I'm going to tell you a weird thing that I did. Does anyone here know what a SWAT is? You know what a SWAT is? Roger, what's the S? Yes, it's the 4 quadrants. What's the S? Anyone know? Strengths. Mm-hmm. Opportunities. Threats. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. Okay? And it's a common business school practice. It was originated like probably 40 years ago now. But it's basically a good way to assess where you're at right now and kind of the potentialities that also arise out of you. Here's what I'm good at, strengths. Here's what I need to kind of shore up, or my problematic tendencies, weaknesses. The opportunities and threats is how high could this go if I fix this and address this? If I take advantage of my strengths, if I shore up my weaknesses, how high can I go? What are my opportunities? And then the threats is, how low could this go? Right? Where could this end up? And I remember, so I did this with my 8-year-old. Right? And I remember walking in with, and whiteboards. We had a lot. I'm a whiteboard guy, right? If you ever want to buy me something, just buy me a whiteboard, any size. And I walked into my apartment, and I walked up the apartment. I made a left into the living room, and Hannah's just there, and she's just like this, right? If you saw her from the front, it would look like one of those creepy kids you see in a horror movie that just has their head tilted. But I saw her from the back. She was looking at it, and she was looking at her SWAT. And I walked up next to her, and she's like this big at the time, and I was like, "What's the matter?" And she's like, "I'm just looking at my SWAT." And I said, is it upsetting you? And she said, "No, because it's just true." I don't know if she's that person anymore. But there is a level in which what was said there is there were people that loved her, that knew her, and that pursued her growth. And she was believing that this is a kind of objective and well-meant analysis of me that could lead to my growth if I took it seriously. And in some ways, that's what Jesus is calling us to do here. He's calling us to kind of take this thoughtful evaluation of ourselves so that we grow. Because all of us have this sense that there's something wrong with us. We know this. But our usual response is, if you ignore it, well, you're going to keep judging other people because you might hate the things about yourself that you see in them, or your knees get so buckled under the weight of this pressure that you put on yourself, right? And so what we want to avoid is the harmful condemnation of them or of yourselves by taking a more deliberate process, by inviting evaluation, by inviting feedback from people who love you and are pursuing your growth. Here's what this looks like for me every week. Okay? Now, for any of those who are in education, I've kind of talked to you about the crazy that is Newark Collegiate Academy. That's where I work. Okay? Now, this is the month of August. Now, we super care about our teachers getting off to what we call a strong start. Strong start. All right? Now, this is the calendar of like the first 2 weeks of our school year. So we start our school year, there's a couple days before this, but let's just say it starts August 22nd. All right? We're not just teaching classes, we are having coaches in teachers' classrooms for every single day for basically the first 2 weeks. And they are taking data on that teacher. And they are, rate directs. Directs is the teacher you're coaching. So you're rating your direct on the strong start tracker by the end of 8th period every day. So I'm getting evaluated, I'm getting rated. By the way, just so you know, we are not doing this at PCC. All right? So in case anyone's mind was going there, we're not doing this to PCC. However, the spirit of this is caring about an intentional process where you are monitoring what it looks like for us to grow. And so you are taking data on this teacher every single day. You're inputting it into this system. You're doing it again the next week. You head into September. You're doing it. And then there's this thing by the middle of September, this thing called O3s begin. Here's what O3s are. There are one-on-ones where your coach meets with you one-on-one each week. And they're looking at your lesson plans with you. And here's the other thing they're looking at. Because when they're visiting your classroom every single day, here's what they also have in front of them. They're doing this. Right? So they're recording. And so when we're meeting in these O3s, these one-on-ones, you're looking at parts of your lesson plan, and you're looking at this video segment together, and you're analyzing it together. How could that have been stronger? What went well there? What did not go well? How could it have been stronger? But wait, there's more. You're in that O3, you're in that one-on-one, which lasts about 47 minutes. And you're taking that video segment, you're analyzing it, and once you've identified how it could be stronger, you know what they do? Why don't we practice it right now? And so you practice doing that segment again with your coach. Maybe there's one or two other people in the room, who knows, but you're going to practice it again until it gets to the point at which until it gets to the point where it's addressing the students that will eventually be in that room the next day. Because, and here's the banner that hangs over this entire phase. Karen, you okay? No. Okay. Here's where all of this is going. Here's where all of this is going. This is the hashtag that's kind of put over this season. So it's on the dock at the top. There is a low tolerance for ineffective teaching.
Are these teachers being asked? Are they asked, can you come in and help me?
Sometimes, but not the first 2 weeks of the year. The first 2 weeks of the year, they're told there's going to be people in your room. And here's the reality, right? Like now, like when I first joined the school and someone said they were going to observe me, here's what I would say to them. I'd be like, hey, I'm going to be good. You know, if you got to go visit other teachers, go right ahead. I'll just be here. I don't want to make extra work for you. Now, I've gotten to a place where it's like, please visit my class. Because you know what? My 7th period, it's at the end of the day, they just, there's this part of the lesson, it's just not engaging. And I don't know if it's me, if it's them. I need another set of eyes on it. Or I might say to another teacher, maybe a novice teacher, like, hey, my 5th period, this area that you're struggling with in your class seems to be working well in mine. I might do it a little differently. Come visit me. Or I might tell them, go visit this other teacher in this other content area. You're an English teacher. Maybe this math teacher might be helpful for you. So we get to this place where what we're saying is, give me input. Help me grow. Like in medicine, they do this, right? Rounds. When teams of aspiring physicians will go and visit different rooms, operating rooms and whatnot, and they'll just take data. And so it's all like low tolerance for ineffective physicians, low tolerance for ineffective teachers, and what I want to say is low tolerance for ineffective discipleship, sanctification, growth in Christian community as well. And so, yes, we won't do this level of like militant, heavy coaching here at PCC, but there is an aspect of this to what I would call our Are you raising a question? What's your question? Huh? Yeah. Can you hold it for like a couple minutes? Great, love it. We are going to do an element of this, or have been actually, with coaching and care. Like when I meet with Howie every week, he meets with me every week. We talk through the previous week, what's coming ahead. When we meet with the board, even when I counsel people, there is this sense in which we're not just having a coffee date before we have our next coffee date, without a growth in mind. There is an intentional growth that we have. We have people right now that are interested in being baptized, right? And that's going to be a joyful moment for us when we celebrate that. However, I want to have a conversation with those people so that we understand what it actually means for us to say we identify with Jesus and the community of people following him. And so this is all in the interest of what it means for us to welcome the spec and the log evaluation of ourselves and others. Because as intimidating as this is, what Jesus is actually saying is, this work is freedom. And I don't call you to anything that doesn't ultimately lead to freedom. Because what it does, when you can kind of evaluate yourself, is it disarms those unhelpful and untrue narratives that other people might hold over you. And it also disarms the true narratives that you might hold over yourselves. Here's the best way that I can explain this. Has anyone ever seen this? Okay. Has anyone ever seen 8 Mile? All right. I'm going to kind of spoil it for you. Have you seen it, Karen? Okay. So this is Eminem's character, B Rabbit. This is Papa Doc. I forget his name. But at the core of it, Dave, have you seen this? Okay. At the core of it is there's conflict in the movie in this kind of like really poor, impoverished area surrounding Detroit, 8 Mile, kind of trailer park. It's a great movie, great acting, all of that sort of stuff, surprisingly so. The culminating kind of, the arena of conflict is these rap battles they have, right? And, I mean, this movie's 25 years ago, so I really don't feel like I'm spoiling anything. But if you choose to watch it, what you will realize is this is the stage right before the final rap battle, right? And how Eminem's character, Bunny Rabbit, B Rabbit, how he actually winds up winning the battle is, does anyone know? How does he wind up winning the battle? Roger, tell us. Exactly. He knows what material Papa Doc is going to use on him. And so he's got the second round, he's got the first round. So before he even gets on the mic, he's just going to say all the things that he would have said about him. And it completely disarms his opponent to the point where when it comes time for him to speak, he's got nothing. He's got no material. And in some ways, what Jesus is calling us to is this. He's saying, if you rightly evaluate yourself, even like the warts that you have in your story, in your character, what it does is it disarms the ability for other people to use that on you or for you to use that on yourself. If you can get comfortable with your uncomfortable and eventually be as deliberate as you would be with others when you kind of slice and dice them, when you take data, when you organize it into trends, when you do research, when you even have a treatment plan for how that other person can change, if you can do that for yourself with a community of people that you trust and that you know love you and want your best and want you to grow, if you can do that, that is remarkable freedom. That is remarkable freedom that disarms condemnation and shame over you, frees you from wrongful evaluation of yourself, but also frees you from wrongful evaluation of others. And here's where we're going to land with the last verse, the weird verse. Verse 6, do not give dogs what is holy, and do not throw your pearls before pigs, lest they trample them underfoot and turn to attack you. Right? And I'm not going to get into all this. Like, what do the pigs represent? What do the dogs represent? Because clearly, here's one thing they represent. They represent evaluation. And so what you can't do is come out of this passage and say, Jesus has called us not to judge. He's called us not to evaluate, because he's doing it. Some people are pigs, some people are dogs, and later on he'll say, there'll be other passages where Jesus talk about the wolves and the sheep and the goats, different groups of people. And so Jesus is clearly doing some level of scrutiny. He's doing some level of evaluation, some level of judgment. And ultimately, that's where we need to be able to get to, because what's happening in this passage? What's happening in this passage is we need to become compassionate in our evaluation, but also clear with our evaluation of ourselves, so that we can become compassionate in our evaluation of others. So that, and here's where this passage is heading. Pretty soon we're going to head towards the golden rule. Right? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But we're always heading towards the gospel, because what Jesus is saying here is, and we've talked about this for months now, he's commending a spiritual gospel to us. He's commending a social gospel to us, but he's also commending a very, very strategic gospel to us. Because remember, he's building a community and he's starting a movement. And he wants them to be very, very clear about where they should go and where they should not go, where they should invest their time, their talent, their treasure, and where they should not. And in order for them to have that level of wisdom, that level of discernment, they have to evaluate, they have to develop the skill of evaluating rightly. And they'll never develop the skill of evaluating the out there rightly unless they evaluate the in here rightly, and ultimately unless they evaluate themselves rightly. And so if you're going to get to this place, if you're going to say, well, I'm not going to cast my dogs to what is holy and pearls before pigs, lest they trample them and attack us. If you're going to get to a place where you're going to have to be wise with where you give the gospel too much and where you give the gospel too little, then you're going to have to develop those skills with the others that are around you, and ultimately them with you as well. Because whether it's active condemnation, that kind of judgment, or passive non-evaluation, that kind of non-judgment, both of them limits our growth. And what Jesus is saying here is actually eventually it'll limit the gospel's reach as well. And so that's why we're going to end with this table, because at this table, Jesus is calling us to the very gospel that he wants them to be careful about stewarding. And when we come to this table, we want to be, in some sense, aware of sin and aware of hope at the same time. And as I invite Dave and Temmie to come back and lead us in worship, what sin looks like for us, and I want you guys to reflect on this, what sin looks like for us in this passage is maybe our slowness to evaluate ourselves and to have, what was it? Our willingness to have a low tolerance for ineffective growth in our lives. Maybe that's what sin looks like, is that we have developed a high tolerance for just stagnancy in our lives. Maybe that's what sin looks like. Maybe our sin looks like us being slow to extend the gospel wisely to those who are around us. But I also want us to come here not only with sin in mind, but with hope in mind, because this is what Jesus does. He takes something that is intimidating, and he can make it inviting, even inspiring. So when he says, these are the elements of my body and my blood, what Jesus is saying is, hey, listen, I know this is scary. I know this is scary. I would never ask you to do something that I myself wouldn't submit myself to. And so when Jesus asks us to evaluate ourselves, he's asking us to reflect on him at this table as the most scrutinized, condemned, trampled, attacked, and exposed human that's ever been. So when you come to this table with body and blood in mind, his broken body, his poured out blood, come with the fact that Jesus is modeling for us at its worst what this could look like. But he's also extending hope for us in this other way. I want you guys to hear this. You will never be judged more harshly than you were at the cross. Judgment that any other people do towards you, or even judgment you do towards yourself, it will never be harsher than what happened at the cross. That is the greatest condemnation, shame, or judgment that can ever be put over you. And so what Jesus is saying is, don't add to it, because you can't add to it. That's as high and as far and as deep as it will ever go. But on the other side, you will never be given more mercy than you were given at the cross. You will never be given, your sins will never be overlooked more than they were there. So you'll never be judged more, and you'll never be forgiven more than you were there. And so I hope, as you come to this table, what that does is it rescues you, rescues me, rescues us from being defensive when we get feedback, or fragile when we get feedback, or passive as it relates to the growth of those around us or our own, and also judgmental towards others. We will never be able to outdo the judgment and the mercy that is at the cross. And so whether evaluation in our lives and those of us around us need to look like discipleship, whether it needs to look like leadership, whether it needs to look like community, whether it needs to look like counseling, therapy, whatever it is, I pray that you come with the confidence, the invitation, and the inspiration to engage in that work, because Jesus has modeled it for us, and he's given us hope to never be afraid of what evaluation needs to look like. Come when you're ready. Let me pray. Father, let me stamp that because I need to hear that right now. There is never any greater judgment, any greater shame, any greater guilty verdict that could ever be spoken over us than what was already spoken on that cross when you absorbed that. And for that reason, there's no greater mercy that we can give as well. And so I pray, Lord, that frees us up from either hammering other people or ourselves, or just being complacent and not thinking that evaluation and growth is a thing. It's the work you've called us to, Lord. And so through the cross and the empty tomb, would you give us courage, inspiration, invitation, and the freedom to grow in the way that you've called us to here. Give us your spirit to that end. In Jesus' name, amen.